For those of you who are counting, we are just 4 days, a turkey, and a few pies away from Thanksgiving. And as we enter into this holiday and this wider holiday season, the call to gratitude seems to grow louder with each passing day. Our scripture reading this morning, which reads like a kind of short story from the Gospel of Luke, ends as a tale of gratitude, but it begins as one of fear and waiting and wondering what Jesus is going to do for a people who are hurting. This is a story not just about giving thanks, but about what happens when we are surprised by goodness in the midst of the bad, and when, having experienced that goodness, we are able to express our gratitude so that all may hear.
On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 lepers approached him. Keeping their distance, they called out, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." When he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, "Were not 10 made clean? But the other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well."
On the dusty way that wound toward Jerusalem, a community of 10 leprous men waited for a glimpse of the traveling rabbi, the healer that they had been hearing so much about. They were gathered at the usual place for beggars, on the edge of the village where the occasional handout of food or water might be found, so long as they kept their distance from the actual town, and so long as they kept their skin as covered as the rags that were left of their clothes would allow. We can imagine that they were uncomfortable. One of them may be shifting back and forth on his cane. He'd just lost his foot to the disease not too long ago and was still learning how to stand and how to redistribute his weight. And his constant movement sent the bells that had been tied around his neck tingling and tinkling on the wind. But the other lepers didn't care too much about the noise. Jesus was coming, and it was enough for them to worry about that. By their count, it had been 700 years since a leper was last healed in Jerusalem. Not since Naaman, washed in the Jordan River, had anyone dreamed of a cure. Instead, the prescription for leprosy had become a cruel quarantine. Anyone caught exhibiting sores or symptoms was cast out, away from family, friends, work, and worth, as good as dead. And so that's where the bells came from, and the isolation laws, and the command that they shout, "Unclean, unclean," anytime they thought they were drawing too near to someone was healthy. It all came from a dread by those who weren't sick, who desperately wanted to protect themselves from a similar devastating fate. It was a wonder on that day that these 10 lepers could shout at all anymore. They were so tired and sick and worn, but when Jesus neared, they managed to join their weak voices together, softly at first and then louder. "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. We are sick. We are dying. We are comfortless. Jesus, Master, have mercy." And at that wretched sound, the crowds around Jesus fell silent, waiting to see what Jesus would do. If we take this story and fast forward it a few thousand years to West Africa, it might go something like this. On a dusty road outside of Sierra Leone, a 4-year-old was feeling sick when his family sent him to a neighboring village, to his grandmother's home, so that she could care for him. And in that house, surrounded by tall grass and palm trees that were covered in chimes that tinkled and tingled in the wind, the boy's symptoms became serious. A bloody nose at first, and then vomit, and then bloody stools, the classic signs of Ebola. And the other villagers insisted that the grandson be sent out, sent away, sent back home, and that's where he went, and that's where he died a week later. But by then, it was too late. Dozens of other villagers were showing symptoms, and 3 had already died. When the body collectors showed up, they sprayed the grandmother's house with a disinfectant, and they told her never to go inside again. And now the grandmother, banished, wanders by day around the outskirts of town, and at night she shudders beneath a palm tree. It's been weeks now since she passed the 21-day period when she might have shown symptoms, and she never did get sick. But the people still want nothing to do with her. In this town where she has lived for her whole life, where she knows everyone and where everyone knows her, she is a stranger now, as good as dead. She is sick, even though she doesn't have Ebola, and she is dying, and she is comfortless. Jesus, Master, have mercy. And at that wretched sound, we crowds around Jesus fall silent as we wait to see what he will do for the sick, the homeless, jobless, dreamless, directionless, faithless, living wageless, lonely, isolated, and afraid. Jesus, Master, have mercy. What will you do? The problem and the challenge of this story from the Gospel of Luke is that compared to other healing stories, Jesus doesn't really do much at all. When he hears the 10 lepers cry out, he looks at them, and seeing what anyone could see, that they were eaten up with disease and needed all the mercy they could get, he tells them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And that's it. There's no touching, no praying, no dramatic casting out of a demon or disease, just words and a quick sentence of a command. Perhaps because they have great faith, or because there's simply nothing left for them to do, the lepers begin walking toward the temple, when somewhere off stage from what we actually see in the story, each of them notices something odd. Each looks to the companion on his right and his left and notices that the people next to him, their scars have disappeared and their missing flesh has returned. And then each one looks down at his own hands and sees that they are healthy and brown without a mark in sight. And before they know it, 9 of the 10 are in a dead run to the synagogue to show themselves to the priest and be proclaimed clean, when one pauses, turns around, and runs toward Jesus instead. He runs, shouting at the top of his lungs. He falls flat on his face at Jesus' feet, lost in gratitude for the joy of wholeness and the gift of life that he has received, and pleased with the once leprous man's return. Jesus tells him, "Get up, go on your way. Your faith has made you well." Now, depending on how we read this story, 2 things may be happening here. It could be that Jesus, pleased with the leper's return and how this return adds to Jesus' own honor as a benefactor of the unwell, Jesus actually blesses the leper a second time. And this would be a fitting gesture. It certainly helps explain why Jesus asks that question about the 9 lepers who didn't return. Where are the other 9, he asks, even though he knows where they've gone. He sent them to the temple. And so they are on their way to Jerusalem. They are on their way to find the chief priest who can proclaim them ritually clean, on their way to perform the appropriate rituals, to make a sacrifice of thanksgiving, and to say the Thanksgiving psalm. They are on their way to restoration and to finding the family and friends that should have been lost to them for life, and to engage in their own praise and glorification of God that just happens to not be happening at Jesus' feet. Frankly, when I read this story, I don't blame the other 9 for not going back. They're simply following direction, checking items off of their to-do list. They're getting themselves back in line with the community. And while Jesus asks for them, I can't help but notice that he doesn't condemn them for going another way. It's the way that he sent them. As far as the text tells us, those 9 have most certainly been healed, and they have not done anything wrong, and it seems unlikely that Jesus would exclude them from a blessing or a wellness of any kind. But Jesus seems to believe that there is something different about that 10th man. So what is it? What is it that's different about that 10th man? It's something about the way, I think, that he stops in his tracks. Perhaps when Jesus says that this man has been made well, he's expressing what each of us likely already knows. Gratitude is a pleasant and a beautiful act, not just because it allows us to give thanks to someone who has helped us or healed us in some way, but also because it causes us to bear witness to the happy conditions of our own souls. Gratitude draws us out of ourselves into something bigger. Gratitude connects us with healing and faith and happiness and health. And when we take the time to witness our happiness, to pause and express it, and to let it fill the air and occupy our time, we are, each of us, made well. A friend of mine put it this way: so many things in our lives suck the air out of a room. People and events and emotions, but gratitude has the power to put the air back in. It's amazing how often we give our attention to the things that suck the air out of the room, as opposed to the things that put life and air back in. Sometimes we do it to the point that we're caught off guard when someone calls our attention to anything that isn't bad. This isn't a new trend in human action or emotion. It's been happening since time immemorial, I imagine, or at least for the past few hundred years. In the mid-1800s, the poet Emily Dickinson wrote a letter about this instance, and a letter about her father, who caught an entire neighborhood by surprise with his own expression of gratitude. And she told the story like this: "We were all startled one evening by a violent fire bell ringing, and thinking of nothing but fire, we rushed into the street to see. But when we arrived, we saw not a fire, but a lovely evening sky, colored gorgeously with pink and gold, displaying itself to the wondering and admiring of the people who issued forth at Mr. Dickinson's command. For Father happened to see it first, and he rang the bell to call our attention to the view." Just imagine that, hearing a siren for a fire, and then being treated to the most beautiful of sunsets instead. Here then is another value that gratitude has to offer. In giving thanks for the joy and beauty of life, we can make others well too. Maybe this is why Jesus was so pleased to see the leper return to give thanks. Not because Jesus needed that gratitude to puff himself up and make him feel good, nor because he thought that this one man was inherently better than the other 9, but because this man, by coming back, sounded the alarm. And the whole community got a chance to see and to hear No longer a carrier of disease, by entering into the community and shouting his gratitude for all to hear, he became a carrier of hope and of wellness instead. I can almost see Jesus turning to the crowd at that point and smiling, saying, "Get up and go, all of you. His faith has made you well, too." So often it's in the small gestures that we and our worlds are made well. And when we make those gestures in community, we have the power to expand our gratitude, to expand the uplifted conditions of our souls beyond our own small worlds, and to grow them into something more. Even a broken West African woman shuddering beneath a tree, reeling from the aftermath of Ebola, a lost grandson, a lost community, can begin to be made well in a small act of gratitude when someone from the village finally comes to her, extends her hand, and says, "Grandmother, I am glad that you live. I am glad that you are alive. I am glad that you live here. I am so glad that you live." We live in a world of challenge and of blessing, of joy and of pain, and of many things to do. And in the story of the 10 lepers, we have a tendency to behave like the 9, going along our way, doing what must be done, and expressing our gratitude in the moments that we find ourselves in the temple, when the psalms have already been prepared and the rituals are ready-made. And in his infinite love for us, Jesus does not see this as ingratitude. God is glorified. God is thanked. People are made well. Jesus is pleased. He does and always will understand when we continue toward the temple instead of falling at his feet, but he also extends to us, I believe, an open invitation in every moment of even the smallest joy. We have a chance at all times to stop in our tracks, to experience our blessings right where we are, to let them fill our hearts with joy, and then to share them around by giving them voice then and there. Each of us, in gratitude, has the opportunity to make well and be made well again and again and again. In this Thanksgiving week and always, may it be so. Amen.